My name is Clara, and I'm 28. Every night I walk home from my waitressing shift at a small town diner, the streets quiet under flickering lights. My feet ache, but there's comfort in the routine, the familiar hum of my neighborhood. That night felt no different until a man grabbed my arm, his voice low and urgent. "Keep walking and pretend you're my wife," he said. My heart pounded, fear and confusion crashing in. What would you do when safety vanishes in a moment? If this grips you, hit like and subscribe. Where are you watching from? Let me know below. My name is Clara, and I'm still trying to make sense of that night. The man's grip on my arm was firm but shaky, like he was as scared as I was. He whispered his name, Ethan, and said he was in trouble, needing me to play along to avoid some people chasing him. My diner uniform scratched against my skin as we moved, the night air colder now. I kept my eyes on the cracked sidewalk, my mind spinning. Should I scream, run? His voice had this raw edge, like he was begging without saying it. I thought of my dad, gone 5 years now, who always said, "Trust your gut, but don't freeze." My gut was a mess, torn between fear and this nagging pull to believe Ethan's panic was real. I glanced at him, his face half hidden under a faded baseball cap. He looked maybe 30, with tired eyes that darted to every shadow. We passed the old hardware store, its windows dark, and I felt the weight of my choice to keep walking. My hand slipped into my pocket, fingers brushing the wooden bird Dad carved when I was a kid. It was smooth, worn from years of carrying it, and I gripped it like it could steady me. Ethan's voice broke the silence, low and rushed. He said we needed to look convincing, like we were just a couple heading home. Then he pressed something into my hand, a cheap metal ring, cold and too big for my finger. "Slip it on," he said, "it'll sell the act." I froze for a second, the ring heavy in my palm. It reminded me of Mom and Dad's fights, the way Mom would twist her wedding band when she was angry, like it was choking her. They split when I was 10, and I hadn't thought about that ring in years. I slid Ethan's ring on my stomach, twisting. It felt wrong, like I was stepping into a lie I couldn't undo. I asked him who was after him, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head, saying it was complicated, that I wouldn't understand. His vagueness stung, like he didn't trust me, even though I was risking everything to help him. My thoughts drifted to Lucas, my older brother, who'd know exactly what to do. Or at least the old Lucas would have. He was always the brave one, the one who'd stand up to bullies or sneak us out for late-night drives. But 5 years ago, he and Mom had a blowout word so sharp I still flinched thinking about them. He left town promising to come back, but all I got was one letter postmarked from a city I'd never heard of. I kept it in my dresser, rereading it when I missed him. If he were here, would he tell me to ditch Ethan? Or would he see something in him like I was starting to? We turned onto Maple Street, the houses smaller and closer together, their porch lights casting weak glows. Ethan's steps quickened, and I struggled to keep up, my sneakers scuffing the pavement. He muttered something about needing to get to a safe spot, but his eyes kept flicking behind us. I followed his gaze, my heart lurching. Nothing but empty street, but the hairs on my neck stood up. I asked him again what was going on, sharper this time. He sighed like I was exhausting him and said it was about money, a debt he couldn't pay. His tone was clipped, like he was shutting me out. I felt a spark of anger. I was putting my life on the line for a stranger who wouldn't even give me a straight answer. My mind raced back to Lucas's letter, where he wrote about making mistakes, about running from them. Was Ethan like that, dragging me into his mess? I wanted to stop, to demand the truth, but his grip tightened, pulling me forward. The ring on my finger felt heavier, a reminder of the role I was playing. I didn't know if I was saving him or sinking myself, and that uncertainty clawed at me, leaving me hollow. The streetlights on Maple grew dimmer, their buzz barely audible over my pounding heart. Ethan's hand was still on my arm, guiding me past a row of sagging mailboxes. My anger from his vague answers simmered, but fear kept me moving. I noticed his jacket frayed at the cuffs and a faint smell of cigarettes clinging to him. It made him seem more real, less like a phantom pulling me into the dark. But that didn't ease the knot in my chest. I whispered, asking what kind of debt could make someone hunt him like this. He glanced at me, eyes sharp, and said it was from a bad deal, something he couldn't outrun. His voice cracked like he was carrying more than he let on. We passed a corner store, its neon sign flickering. A group of guys stood outside laughing over beers, their voices rough. Ethan's shoulders tensed, and he pulled me closer, his breath hot against my ear. "Don't look at them," he said. "Just keep your head down." My pulse spiked. One of the men, tall with a shaved head, locked eyes with me. His stare was cold, like he knew something I didn't. I forced my gaze to the ground, my sneakers catching on a raised crack in the pavement. I stumbled the hem of my diner uniform, snagging on a rusty fence post. Ethan's hand steadied me, but his fingers dug in too hard, leaving a dull ache. I wanted to yank free to demand he stop treating me like a prop in his escape plan. But that man's stare lingered in my mind, chilling me. I thought of Lucas again, how he'd always been reckless, jumping into fights or schemes without thinking. Once when I was 12, he dragged me along to a bonfire with his friends, promising it'd be fun. I ended up stranded when he ditched me for some girl, leaving me to walk home alone in the dark. That memory stung, now mirroring this moment with Ethan. Was I just following another reckless soul, hoping for a different ending? Ethan's pace slowed as we reached a crosswalk, the signal blinking red. He scanned the street, his jaw tight. I caught a glimpse of his wrist where a small tattoo of a sparrow peeked out from his sleeve. It was delicate, almost out of place on his rough hands. Something about it tugged at me like a half-forgotten dream, but I couldn't pin it down. I asked him quieter this time if those men were the ones after him. He shook his head, but his silence felt heavier than before, like he was hiding something bigger. My frustration boiled over. I stopped walking, planting my feet despite his pull. I said I deserved to know what I was risking my neck for. His eyes flicked to mine, and for a second, I saw something raw, maybe guilt. He said I didn't get it, that some mistakes follow you forever. His words hit too close, reminding me of Lucas's letter, where he'd written about his own regrets. I wanted to press Ethan to make him spill everything, but a car horn blared nearby, snapping us back. He tugged me across the street, muttering we had to keep moving. As we hurried on, the air grew thicker, like the night itself was closing in. My hand brushed the fake ring on my finger, its weight mocking me. I felt like I was sinking deeper into Ethan's world, a place I didn't belong. Those men by the store, the sparrow tattoo, his cryptic words, they all swirled in my head, building a dread I couldn't shake. I didn't know if I was helping a desperate man or walking straight into a trap, and that uncertainty was suffocating, pulling me toward something darker I couldn't yet see. The street faded behind us as Ethan steered me toward Lincoln Park, its entrance marked by a sagging iron gate. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of wet grass. He said it was a shortcut to somewhere safe, but the park's empty paths, lit only by a few dying lamps, felt like a cage. My sneakers sank into the soft earth, each step harder than the last. I kept glancing back, half expecting that cold-eyed man from the store to appear. Ethan's hand was still on my arm, looser now, but urgent, like he was afraid I'd bolt. I was angry not just at him, but at myself. Why was I still here, following a stranger who fed me scraps of truth? His talk of a debt and a bad deal echoed in my head, too vague to trust. I thought of Hannah, my coworker at the diner who'd lectured me about walking home alone. She'd stood by the coffee machine last week, hands on her hips, saying a woman's gotta be smarter than the world. I'd rolled my eyes then, but now her words burned. If she saw me trailing Ethan into this park, she'd drag me out herself. I asked him, my voice low but sharp, where we were really going. He didn't look at me, just muttered about a place he could lay low. His evasiveness was like a slap. I stopped walking, yanking my arm free. The fake ring on my finger caught the moonlight, glinting like a cruel joke. I told him I wasn't moving another step until he explained why I should trust him. His eyes flicked to mine, then away, and he rubbed his neck, the sparrow tattoo shifting under his sleeve. He said I didn't need to know everything, just enough to keep us alive. Before I could argue, something fell from his pocket, a crumpled piece of paper hitting the dirt. He lunged for it, but I saw at first a photo of a little girl with pigtails, maybe 6 years old, smiling at a birthday cake. My breath caught. Ethan snatched it up, his hands trembling, and for a second his face softened, eyes glistening like he was somewhere else. I asked who she was. My voice quieter now. He stuffed the photo back, saying she was nobody, but the crack in his voice told me otherwise. That photo changed something. I wasn't just scared anymore, I was furious. If he had a kid, why was he dragging me into his mess? I thought of my mom, Diane, who'd shut me out after Lucas left. She'd sit at the kitchen table staring at his empty chair like I wasn't even there. Her silence hurt more than any fight, and now Ethan's secrecy felt like that same rejection. I stepped closer, demanding to know if that girl was why he was running. He snapped, saying I was asking too much, that I didn't get what it meant to lose everything. His words stung sharp and personal. I wanted to scream that I knew loss, that Lucas's absence had carved a hole in me, that Mom's coldness had left me scrambling to feel whole. But before I could, I heard footsteps, faint but steady, crunching on the path behind us. Ethan froze, his eyes wide. He grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward a cluster of trees. My heart slammed against my ribs. Whoever was following was close, and Ethan's fear was contagious, wrapping around me like a vice. The trees' shadows swallowed us, their branches clawing at the sky. Ethan's grip on my wrist was bruising his breath ragged as we crouched behind a thick oak. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate, like whoever was out there knew exactly where to look. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out the distant hum of crickets. I wanted to ask Ethan who was following us, but his eyes were locked on the path, wide and unblinking. The sparrow tattoo on his wrist seemed to pulse in the dim light, a silent taunt. I pressed my back against the rough bark, my diner apron damp with sweat. The cheap ring on my finger dug into my skin, a constant reminder of the lie I was living. I thought of calling Mom, picturing her voice on the phone, sharp and judging. She'd say I was foolish, that I should have stayed home, that I was always chasing trouble like Lucas. The thought of her blame made my chest ache, but I couldn't shake the urge to hear her, to have someone anchor me. Yet I knew she wouldn't come, not for me. Ethan whispered, barely audible, that it was a debt collector, someone he'd crossed years ago. His voice was tight, like he was swallowing glass. I asked why he didn't just pay my words harsher than I meant. He turned to me, his face close, and I saw a scar above his eyebrow, jagged and pale like it had been there forever. He said it wasn't that simple, that some debts cost more than money. His tone was bitter, accusing, like I was the one who'd trapped him here. That scar held my gaze, stirring a memory I couldn't place, maybe something from childhood, from Lucas's wild days. It made Ethan feel dangerously familiar, and I hated how it softened my anger. I wanted to demand more, to know why he'd dragged me into this, but the footsteps stopped close enough that I could hear the rustle of fabric. Ethan's hand clamped over my mouth, his skin clammy. My stomach lurched, and I fought the urge to shove him away. I wasn't just scared now, I was furious at him for using me, at myself for not running when I had the chance. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. I thought of Hannah again, her warnings about men like Ethan, about trusting too easily. She'd told me once about her cousin who'd followed a charming guy into a mess she barely escaped. I'd laughed it off, said I wasn't that naive. Now her story felt like a prophecy, and I was living it. I hated how small I felt, how my choice to help Ethan had spiraled into this moment, hiding in the dark like prey. Ethan's hand dropped, and he pointed to a gap in the trees, whispering, "We needed to move." I shook my head, my voice a hiss. I told him I was done, that he needed to tell me everything or I'd scream. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned in, his words cutting. He said I didn't know what loss was, that I'd never had to claw my way back from nothing. The accusation hit like a fist, ripping open old wounds. Lucas's absence, Mom's distance, Dad's death, they all surged up raw and bleeding. Before I could snap back, a shadow moved on the path, tall and broad, pausing just beyond the trees. Ethan's face drained of color, and he grabbed my arm again, pulling me deeper into the park. My legs moved on instinct, but my mind was screaming. I was trapped not just by the man chasing us, but by Ethan's lies, by my own stupid hope that I could save him. The darkness closed in, and I felt like I was drowning, every step pulling me further from the life I'd known. The park's darkness pressed against us as Ethan dragged me deeper, the air thick with the smell of damp leaves. My legs burned, but his grip was relentless, pulling me through a maze of twisted paths. The shadow from the trees was gaining, his footsteps heavier now, like he'd stopped caring about stealth. My chest heaved, each breath sharp, and I felt the wooden bird in my pocket, its edges digging into my thigh. It was all I had to remind me I was still Clara, not some pawn in Ethan's nightmare. We stumbled into a clearing, the moon casting a pale glow over a broken fountain, its basin cracked and dry. Ethan stopped, his hands on his knees, gasping. I yanked my arm free, my voice shaking as I demanded to know who was chasing us. Before he could answer, the man stepped into the light, tall and broad, with a face like weathered stone. He called Ethan by name, his voice low and mocking, saying time was up. He introduced himself as Marcus, and his eyes slid to me, narrowing. He grabbed my wrist, his fingers like iron, and said, I must be the wife that I'd pay for Ethan's games too. My heart stopped. Wife. The fake ring on my finger felt like a brand, now tying me to a lie I hadn't chosen. I tried to pull away, but Marcus's grip tightened, sending a jolt of pain up my arm. Ethan stepped forward, his voice cracking as he begged Marcus to leave me out of it. He said the debt was his, that I was nobody. The word nobody cut deeper than Marcus's hold. After all this, I was still nothing to him, just a shield to hide behind. Marcus laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. He said Ethan owed thousands money tied to hospital bills for his kid, a girl who'd been sick for years. Ethan's face crumpled, and I saw the truth in his eyes, the photo of that little girl flashing in my mind. My anger flared, mixing with a sick pity. He'd lied, used me. But for her, I thought of Lucas, how he'd vanished after our family fell apart. He'd called me weak once, said, I let life happen to me. His voice echoed now, taunting me to do something, anything, but my feet felt glued to the ground. Then Marcus's gaze shifted, and he dropped something small, glinting in the moonlight. It was a locket, silver and worn, tumbling into the grass. My breath caught. It was identical to one Lucas used to wear, a gift from Dad before he died. I'd seen it 100 times hanging around my brother's neck. How did Marcus have it? My mind raced, questions colliding. Was Ethan connected to Lucas? Had he known me all along? The locket felt like a betrayal, a secret Ethan had kept, tying this night to my past in a way I couldn't grasp. I stared at Ethan, my voice barely a whisper, asking if he knew my brother. His eyes widened, but before he could speak, Marcus yanked me closer, his breath hot on my face. He said I was in too deep now, that nobody walked away from this. My fear surged, but so did a raw, burning rage, not just at Marcus, but at Ethan, at Lucas, at every choice that had led me here. I clutched the wooden bird tighter, my knuckles white, and felt something inside me start to crack, ready to shatter. Marcus's grip on my wrist tightened, his knuckles pale as he sneered at Ethan, who stood frozen, his hands raised like he could talk his way out. The clearing felt smaller now, the air choking with tension. Marcus pulled a knife from his jacket, its blade catching the moonlight sharp and thin. My stomach dropped, a cold sweat breaking across my skin. He waved it lazily, not toward me, but close enough to make my knees shake. Ethan pleaded, his voice high and desperate, saying he'd get the money, just give him a week. Marcus laughed, a low, cruel sound, and said Ethan's promises were as worthless as his life. I tried to speak, to tell Marcus I wasn't part of this, but my throat was dry, words stuck like gravel. My mind flashed to the diner, to Hannah's laugh, to Mom's cold stare, to anything that wasn't this moment. Marcus turned to me, his eyes glinting with something darker than anger. He said Ethan had a talent for dragging people down with him, that I should have run when I had the chance. His words sliced deeper than the knife could, exposing my stupidity, my blind trust in a stranger's fear. Ethan took a step forward, his voice breaking as he begged Marcus to let me go. He said I was just a random woman, someone he'd grabbed off the street. The lie burned worse than Marcus's threats. Random, I'd walked with him, worn his ring, risked everything, and now I was nothing, a stranger he'd discard to save himself. My chest ached, not just from fear, but from the humiliation of being so easily erased. I thought of Lucas, how he'd left without a backward glance, and now Ethan was doing the same, stripping me of any worth in this nightmare. Marcus shook his head, the knife still in hand, and said Ethan's kid would pay the real price. He pulled out his phone, showing a grainy photo of the same girl from Ethan's picture, her pigtails tied with red ribbons, standing outside a school. My heart lurched. He said her foster family wouldn't protect her if Ethan didn't deliver. Ethan's knees buckled, a sob tearing from his throat, and I saw a man broken not by the blade, but by the weight of his failures. I wanted to hate him, but the girl's face haunted me, her smile so innocent it hurt. Then Marcus's voice dropped cold and deliberate. He said he'd seen me before at the diner, always alone, always waiting for something that had never come. He mocked me, calling me the kind of woman who'd fall for Ethan's sob story, too desperate for connection to see the trap. His words were a mirror reflecting every doubt I'd buried about Lucas, about Mom, about myself. I felt naked. My flaws laid bare under the moon's glare. The locket Marcus had dropped burned in my mind, a link to Lucas I couldn't unravel, making this moment feel like fate's cruel joke. I opened my mouth to scream, to do anything, but Marcus raised the knife, pointing it at Ethan's chest, and told him to shut up or I'd bleed first. Ethan's eyes met mine, not with guilt, but with defeat, like he'd already lost me. My rage and fear collided, leaving me hollow, standing in a clearing that felt like the edge of the world. Every choice I'd made, every step with Ethan had led to this, and I was drowning in the wreckage with no way out, no voice left to fight. The knife in Marcus's hand gleamed its edge, a silent threat hanging between us. Ethan's defeated eyes were still on me, his sob echoing in the clearing. But Marcus's words, calling me desperate, worthless, kept ringing louder. My legs trembled, the wooden bird in my pocket a faint anchor. I was done being nothing done, letting their choices define me. My fear was still there, sharp and cold, but beneath it, a spark of defiance flickered, fed by every time I'd been left behind by Lucas, by Mom, by Ethan's lies. I scanned the clearing, my eyes catching a fallen branch near the fountain, thick and gnarled. My heart pounded as I edged toward it. Marcus's attention still on Ethan, who was stammering about payment plans. I bent slowly, my fingers closing around the rough wood, its weight solid in my hands. I didn't plan, just swung the branch at Marcus's legs with all the strength I had. It connected with a dull thud, and he staggered, cursing the knife, dropping into the grass. Ethan gasped, his eyes wide, but I didn't look at him. I shouted at Marcus to back off, my voice raw, louder than I'd ever heard it. The sound startled me, like it belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't afraid to break. Marcus recovered, lunging toward me, but I swung the branch again, keeping him at bay. My arms ached, but I held my ground, the fake ring glinting on my finger like a badge of my refusal to stay small. I grabbed Ethan's sleeve, pulling him toward the path I knew led to the gas station on Elm Street, its lights a faint glow through the trees. My sneakers slipped on the damp ground, but I kept moving, Ethan stumbling behind me. My mind flashed to a self-defense class Hannah had dragged me to last year, her voice clear in my head, "Use what's around you. Clara, don't just stand there." I'd laughed it off, called it overkill, but now I clung to her advice. My grip on the branch tightening. Marcus's shouts followed us, his footsteps heavy but slower, maybe from the hit. I didn't dare look back. Ethan panted beside me, muttering thanks, but I snapped at him to keep running. My anger at him hadn't faded, but leaving him wasn't an option, not after seeing that girl's photo. Her pigtails burned into my mind. I thought of Lucas, how I'd always wished I'd fought harder to keep him from leaving. This time, I wasn't letting go, not yet. We broke through the park's edge, the gas station's neon sign closer now, a beacon in the dark. My chest burned, but I felt something new, a fire I hadn't known I had. It wasn't just about surviving Marcus. It was about proving I wasn't the woman he'd mocked, the one who'd fall apart. The branch was still in my hand, heavy but empowering, and as we ran, I felt the weight of my own strength rising, ready to carry me forward. The gas station's lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the cracked pavement. I dropped the branch, my arms trembling from its weight, and pulled Ethan through the glass doors. The clerk, a woman with short hair and a name tag reading Rebecca, looked up from her magazine, her brow furrowing. My breath came in gasps, but I forced my voice steady, asking her to call the police. Ethan tensed beside me, his hand brushing mine as if to stop me, but I stepped away. My eyes locked on Rebecca's. She nodded, reaching for the phone, and I felt a surge of relief, like I'd finally taken the wheel. The diner's charm I'd honed over years, smiling through rude customers and late nights, kicked in. I explained we'd been chased, keeping my words quick but calm, painting Marcus as the threat without mentioning Ethan's debt. Rebecca's gaze softened, and she dialed, her voice firm as she spoke to the dispatcher. I glanced at Ethan, his face pale, and saw something new in his eyes. Not just fear, but a flicker of respect. My thoughts churned, landing on Mom, how she'd always called me impulsive, a dreamer who'd crash and burn. I'd spent years proving her wrong, keeping my life small and safe, but tonight I was rewriting that story. The fake ring on my finger caught the fluorescent light, and I twisted it not with shame, but with purpose. I wasn't Ethan's pawn anymore. I was Clara, and I was choosing my own moves. Ethan leaned in, his voice low, begging me not to involve the cops. He said it'd make things worse for his daughter Lily, that the system would keep her from him. His desperation was real, but I shook my head, my voice quiet but unyielding. I told him I was done with half-truths, that we needed help, not more running. His shoulders slumped, but he didn't argue, and in that silence I felt a shift, like I'd drawn a line he couldn't cross. Rebecca hung up, saying the police were on their way. She offered us water, her eyes flicking to Ethan with a hint of recognition. She whispered to me, saying she'd seen him around, always looking over his shoulder. Her words stung, confirming Ethan's trouble ran deeper than he'd admitted. But they didn't shake me. I thanked her, my voice steady, and turned to Ethan, asking about Lily's photo. He hesitated, then pulled it from his pocket, the edges worn. I saw her name scrawled on the back, Lily, in a child's shaky handwriting, and my heart clenched. But I held his gaze, demanding he trust me now. The bell above the door jangled, and I spun, half expecting Marcus. But it was just a tired trucker grabbing coffee. My pulse slowed, but the weight of the night pressed heavier. I thought of Hannah, how she'd cheer if she saw me now, standing tall instead of shrinking. I'd been the quiet one, the one who let Lucas leave, who let Mom's silence win, but not tonight. I slipped the photo back to Ethan, my fingers brushing his, and told him we'd figure it out, but on my terms. As we waited for the sirens, I stepped to the counter, my back to Ethan, and caught my reflection in the glass door. My hair was messy, my diner apron stained, but my eyes were sharp, alive. I slid the wooden bird from my pocket, holding it tight, and felt Dad's strength in its curves. I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting, not with shouts, but with every choice I made. I turned back to Ethan, my gaze steady, and in that quiet moment, I knew I'd never be nobody again. The gas station's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as the police cruiser pulled up, its red and blue flashes cutting through the night. Rebecca, the clerk, stepped back, her eyes darting between me and Ethan. My hands were still shaking from the run, from the weight of my choice to call for help. I stood by the counter, the wooden bird in my pocket, a quiet comfort. But my resolve felt fragile now, like glass under pressure. Ethan's face was drawn, his jaw tight as two officers approached, their boots heavy on the tile floor. One officer, a woman with a sharp ponytail, asked what happened. I spoke first, my voice steadier than I expected, explaining how Marcus had chased us, how I'd hit him with a branch to escape. Ethan stayed silent, his gaze fixed on the floor like he was bracing for a blow. The officer nodded, scribbling notes, then turned to Ethan, asking for his side. He mumbled about a misunderstanding, his words vague, and I felt a pang of frustration. Even now he was holding back, leaving me to carry the weight of our story. The second officer, a stocky man, escorted Marcus from a squad car, his hands cuffed. His glare found me through the glass door, cold and unyielding, and I shivered, my confidence wavering. The officer mentioned finding a notebook in Marcus's pocket, A list of names and numbers, one of them Lucas's. My breath caught the air suddenly too thick. Lucas's name written in a stranger's hand felt like a violation, a thread tying my brother to this chaos. I turned to Ethan, my voice low, asking if he knew why Lucas was in that book. His eyes flicked up, startled, and he said, Lucas was just someone he'd met. Someone who'd helped him once. His answer was too quick, too thin. I pressed him, stepping closer, my heart racing. I asked about the locket Marcus had dropped, the one like Lucas's. Ethan's face tightened and he admitted Lucas had given it to him months ago, asked him to find me to pass it along. My mind reeled. Lucas had been close enough to send a message, but not to face me himself. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than Marcus's threats, and I felt a hollow ache like I'd been chasing a ghost all along. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling, and called Hannah. Her voice was sleepy at first, then sharp with worry when I told her where I was. She said she was coming, no questions, and I clung to that promise, needing her steadiness. As I hung up, Ethan tried to slip toward the door, his movements quiet like he could vanish. I stepped in front of him, my voice firm, telling him he wasn't leaving until I got answers. His shoulders sagged and he nodded, but his silence was louder than any words, a wall I couldn't break. The officer with the ponytail approached again, saying Marcus was talking, claiming Ethan owed money to dangerous people, not just him. She looked at me, her eyes kind but probing, asking if I knew Ethan before tonight. I shook my head, the truth bitter on my tongue. I'd risked everything for a man I didn't know, and now my brother's name was tangled in his mess. The gas station felt smaller, the walls closing in, and I stood there, my strength from moments ago frozen, trapped in the wreckage of choices I couldn't undo. The gas station's hum faded as Hannah burst through the door, her coat half-buttoned, eyes wild with worry. She pulled me into a hug, her hands cold against my back, and whispered that I scared her half to death. I wanted to collapse into her warmth, but Ethan's presence slouched against the counter kept me rigid. The officer with the ponytail was questioning him, now her voice clipped, and Ethan's answers were soft, evasive. I caught his glance, brief and heavy, like he knew he'd lost something in me. Hannah stepped back, her gaze flicking to Ethan, then to the police. She murmured that she'd seen Lucas last month at a soup kitchen downtown, looking rough but alive. My stomach twisted, her words landing like stones. Lucas was here in this city while I'd been waiting for a letter, a call, anything. I asked her why she hadn't told me, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, her eyes dropping, and said he'd begged her not to, that he wasn't ready to face me. The air felt thinner, like I was breathing through a straw. I turned to Ethan, my throat tight, and asked what Lucas had said about me. He shifted his hands in his pockets and spoke slowly, like each word cost him. He said Lucas talked about a sister who deserved better, someone he'd let down. He'd given Ethan the locket to pass on a way to say sorry, without showing his face. My fingers curled into fists, nails biting my palms. Lucas's apology delivered through a stranger felt like a slap, cheap and distant after years of silence. The officer interrupted, holding up a small creased note she'd found in Ethan's jacket. She read it aloud, a child's scrawl thanking her hero dad for never giving up. Ethan's eyes glistened and he looked away, his jaw trembling. The note was Lily's, his daughter, and its weight settled over me, softening my anger but not my hurt. I saw a man fighting for his kid, but also one who'd used me, who'd known my brother's pain and still pulled me into his chaos. My phone buzzed, Mom's name lighting up the screen. I stared at it, the gas station's fluorescent glare reflecting off the glass. Hannah urged me to answer, but I let it ring, picturing Mom's voice, cold and accusing, saying I'd brought this on myself. Her distance had always felt like punishment, and now, knowing Lucas was close but hiding, I felt it again, sharper. I'd fought for Ethan, for myself, but the people I loved most were still out of reach, their absence louder than ever. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice low, saying he was sorry, that he hadn't meant to drag me this far. His words were earnest, but they fell flat, unable to bridge the gap he'd created. I looked at him, then at Hannah, then at the note in the officer's hand, and felt a quiet ache spread through me. I'd taken control, called for help, but the cost was this truth, Lucas's shame, Mom's silence, Ethan's regret. They pressed against me, heavy and unyielding, and I stood there, my strength spent, staring into a night that offered no answers. The morning after felt like waking from a fever dream, the diner's familiar hum pulling me back to earth. I sat in my usual booth, the one by the window, a cup of black coffee cooling in my hands. The clatter of plates and the low chatter of regulars wrapped around me, a soft tether to normalcy. My apron hung on its hook untouched, and I traced the grain of the wooden table, its scratches mapping years of small moments. Hannah slid into the seat across from me, her eyes searching mine, but she didn't push. Just handed me a warm biscuit from the kitchen. I took a bite, the buttery flake melting on my tongue, and felt a quiet gratitude for her presence. The night's weight lingered, Lucas's absence, Ethan's truths, Mom's unanswered call. But here in the morning light, it didn't crush me. I told Hannah I was okay, my voice soft but sure, and she nodded, her smile small but real. We talked about nothing, the weather. A new cook who burned the hash browns, and it was enough, a pause in the storm. My fingers found the wooden bird in my pocket, its curves worn smooth, a piece of Dad I'd carried through every hurt. I thought of the park, the fear, the locket, but also the moment I'd swung that branch, the fire in my chest when I'd refused to break. That Clara knew someone who'd looked danger in the face and kept moving. I wondered if Lucas would see her now, if he'd recognize the sister he'd left behind. Hannah mentioned the shelter again, saying she'd drive me if I wanted to find him. I didn't answer, just sipped my coffee, letting the idea settle. Outside, a sparrow landed on the sidewalk, hopping between crumbs, its tiny head tilted. It reminded me of Ethan's tattoo, but softer, free. I watched it flutter away, and something in me loosened like a knot I'd been tugging for years. I'd always thought strength meant holding on to Lucas, to Mom's approval, to the life I thought I should have. But sitting here with Hannah's quiet company and the diner's steady rhythm, I wondered if strength was letting go just a little to make room for something new. I pulled out my phone, the screen still showing Mom's missed call. My thumb hovered, but I set it down, not ready yet. Hannah caught my eye. Her look gentle, and said I didn't have to decide everything today. Her words were simple, but they landed deep, like permission to breathe. The diner's warmth seeped into me, and I leaned back, the booth creaking under my weight. For the first time in hours, my shoulders relaxed, and I let the world slow just for a moment, holding the quiet like a gift. The diner's morning glow faded as I left Hannah to her shift, stepping into the crisp air. I walked toward the police station, my steps slow, deliberate, the address for Lily's foster home tucked in my pocket. Ethan had given it to me before they took him, for questioning, his voice quiet, asking me to check on her. I didn't owe him anything, but Lily's face, bright and hopeful in that photo, had rooted itself in me. I passed a street vendor selling flowers, their petals soft against the gray sidewalk, and bought a single daisy, its simplicity grounding me. At the station, Ethan sat in a small room, his hands folded, looking smaller than the man who'd grabbed my arm. I didn't sit, just stood by the door, the daisy twirling between my fingers. I asked if he'd told the truth about Lily, my voice even not accusing. He nodded, thanks she was all he had, that he'd been trying to get her back from foster care. His eyes met mine, raw but steady, and I saw a father, not a liar. I told him I'd visit her, no promises, just a check-in. He exhaled a faint thank you, slipping out, and I felt a weight lift, not for him, but for me. Walking away, I slipped the fake ring from my finger, its cheap metal warm from my skin. I didn't toss it, just tucked it into my pocket beside the wooden bird, a keepsake of the night I'd found my own strength. My phone buzzed again, Mom's name flashing, and this time I answered. Her voice was softer than I expected, saying Hannah had called her, that she was sorry for staying distant. I listened, my reply short, but her words didn't sting like before. We agreed to talk later, and as I hung up, I felt a quiet shift, like a door left ajar. I passed a small park, kids laughing on swings, their voices bright against the morning. I thought of Lucas, not with anger, but with a strange peace. He was out there carrying his own scars, and I could find him when I was ready, not to fix him, but to know him again. The daisy's petals brushed my thumb, and I smiled, small but real. I'd been running from loss from Mom's silence, from Lucas's choices, but now I was walking one step at a time towards something I could build. I stopped at a bench, the wood cool under my hands, and looked up at the sky, pale blue and endless. The world felt wide, not heavy, and I breathed it in slow and deep. Lily's address was a promise I'd keep, not for Ethan, but for the part of me that still believed in second chances. I held the daisy close, its fragility, a mirror of my own, and sat there still, letting the quiet settle over me like a soft blanket, ready for whatever came next. Weeks passed, and I found myself at a small house on the edge of town, a place with a tidy lawn and a swing set in the back. Lily opened the door, her eyes bright, a crayon clutched in her hand. I smiled, introducing myself as a friend of her dad's, and her foster mom, Grace, welcomed me in her voice warm, like she'd been expecting me. The living room smelled of fresh laundry, and I sat on a worn couch watching Lily sketch a house with a big sun above it. She talked fast about school, her favorite teacher, and I listened, my heart easing with every word. Grace shared that Ethan was working with a lawyer, fighting to see Lily again, and I nodded, glad for her hope, not his. Back home, I started new routines, small but mine. I enrolled in a night class at the community college, a basic writing course, something I'd always wanted but never dared. My notebook filled with sentences, messy and honest, a place to untangle the night that changed me. I walked to class under streetlights, no longer flinching at shadows, my steps steady on the pavement. The diner was still my anchor, but I took breaks outside, sitting on a bench with a thermos of tea, watching clouds drift across the sky. Those moments felt like breathing again, like I was learning who I could be. Mom and I met for coffee on Sundays, our talks cautious but growing. She'd bring homemade muffins, blueberry ones, and we'd sit in a quiet shop sharing stories that didn't hurt. She spoke of her own regrets, her voice softer than I'd ever heard, and I listened, not needing her to be perfect anymore. I told her about my class, about Lily, and she smiled, a real one, her hand brushing mine. It wasn't a fix, but it was a start, and that was enough. I found Lucas's shelter one gray afternoon, my heart steady as I walked inside. He was there, thinner, his hair longer, but still my brother. We sat at a folding table, coffee cups between us, and talked not about the past, but about now, his job at a warehouse, my writing. His laugh was the same, and when I left, I hugged him, brief but tight, knowing we'd find our way back, one conversation at a time. The weight of his absence didn't vanish, but it was lighter, something I could carry. Evenings I'd sit on my porch, a blanket over my knees, the air cool and sharp. I'd watch the stars faint against the town's glow, and think of Lily's drawing, that big sun she'd sketched. I was finding my own light, not bright or bold, but steady, built from choices I'd made, from nights I'd survived. The world felt softer now, not because it had changed, but because I had, and I leaned into that quiet, letting it hold me. One evening I returned to Lincoln Park, the place where fear had once pinned me down. The paths were the same, lined with gnarled oaks, but the air felt different, lighter, as if the night had let go of its grip. I sat on a bench near the old fountain, its cracks softened by moss, and pulled out the wooden bird from my pocket. My fingers traced its lines, and I took a small knife from my bag, one I'd borrowed from the diner's kitchen. Slowly I carved a tiny sparrow into the bird's side, my hands steady, the blade precise. It wasn't perfect, but it linked Dad's gift to Lily's hope, to the strength I'd found that night. I held it up the wood, catching the fading light, and felt a quiet pride, not loud but deep. I thought about the choices that brought me here, not just that night, but all the ones before. Trusting Ethan, chasing Lucas, waiting for Mom to see me. Each had hurt, each had taught. I'd learned that pain doesn't define you, but what you build from it does. It's not about erasing the scars, but wearing them with purpose, letting them remind you of what you've carried and what you've set down. I forgave Ethan not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to be free. I forgave Lucas not for leaving, but for being human like me. And Mom. I was learning to meet her where she was not where I wished she'd be. That was my freedom, choosing connection over resentment, courage over fear. Lily's laughter stayed with me, a reminder that hope can bloom in hard places. My writing class became a space to tell those stories, not just mine, but hers. Lucas's, even Ethan's. I wasn't fixing the world, just my corner of it, one word, one visit, one coffee with Mom at a time. The stars above the park twinkled faint but steady, and I realized that's what healing is, not a grand moment, but 1,000 small ones stitched together by choice. I stood slipping the carved bird back into my pocket and walked home, the night soft around me. I wasn't the Clara who'd walked these streets before, scared and searching. I was someone new, not perfect, but whole, ready for whatever lay ahead. What moment made you realize you could rebuild even after breaking? Share it below. Let's hold space for those truths. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, or share it with someone who needs it. Thank you for listening, for being here. Here's to finding light wherever you are.